I'm going to start with some introductions. So probably a familiar voice to some, but definitely not to all. So my name is Paul Stas. I'm the head of sales here at StrongPoint. Been with the company now for 3 years, working with companies of all sizes on how to tackle challenges, just like the ones that we're talking about today. So what I'm going to do is walk through a few slides with you, talk a little bit about kind of why governance, what are the benefits of it to an organization. And it doesn't really matter the size or the stage or the level of maturity. There's always benefits, and they can just be implemented to different degrees. So I'll kind of talk about that a little bit. And then Salesforce kind of recommends these 5 foundational processes of kind of putting in place a lean governance framework. And so I'm going to walk through those with you if you're not familiar with them already. If you are, the kind of back half of the webinar is going to be talking about kind of some challenges and some gaps within those 5 processes or those 5 steps, and how StrongPoint, as an example, can be used to help streamline and automate them a little bit. So even if you are familiar with them, I think there's still some value in this for you. And then I'm going to try to keep the demo to a bit of a minimum, but I do want to kind of show you some things for those that are brand new to StrongPoint, so that you can get a sense of like how StrongPoint can help you in these areas. And then if you're interested in learning more, the best bet would be to reach out. You can do so by email. You can come to our website, submit a form, a couple of different ways, or meet us at Dreamforce. And we'd be happy to kind of walk through this with you in more detail. So that's the agenda for the day. I should be able to wrap up right on time. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop them into the chat box, or there's a question app up there for you as well that you can submit questions to. So before I officially get started, I want to make 2 things really clear. So first of all, governance is not the same thing as a center of excellence. It's not the same thing as a change review board. And a center of excellence is not just audit. That's not what this is about, right? Governance processes need to be in place, kind of underlying foundationally, in order for a center of excellence to function effectively. But just because you don't have a center of excellence doesn't mean you don't need governance either, right? These things are definitely intertwined and connected, but they are 2 separate things. The second point that I quickly wanted to kind of throw out there is that governance is not slow. People think of governance sometimes as being red tape and bureaucracy, and I don't have time to implement that because I need to run my business, right? But when you've got a strong governance framework in place, you are so much more effective when actually managing your org. So let's talk a little bit about kind of some of the benefits that governance brings to an organization, right? So first of all, can provide overarching vision for the platform. Like, what is this thing and where are we trying to take it? It's super important to have that in mind, because a lot of decisions on the platform about what to do and when and how and where will need to be related back to that point, right? So to that point, this also helps create alignment across teams and projects, right? Not just people, but also projects, because there's often multiple things kind of on the go all at the same time. Having a strong governance framework in place also can lead directly to increased user adoption, overall user satisfaction, right? They feel like the platform is meeting their needs, that it's responsive, it's trustworthy, so on and so forth, right? And it can also create synergies between the business and end users and the IT teams that are actually administrating the platform, right? Really important point, I'm going to harp on this a bunch today, is this concept of prioritization and speed and velocity, right? How can we help move things along really quickly, really effectively? And kind of last couple points here, if you're doing all of those first things well, do you think you're going to save time? Do you think you're going to use your resources effectively? Do you think that's going to relate back to cost savings? It absolutely will, right? Running a platform like this effectively absolutely drives down costs. And then finally, for those that are here that are interested in SOX, we're seeing increasingly that Salesforce is creeping into scope for SOX because of the impact on financials. And so also, regulated environments, even if SOX is out of scope, having a strong governance framework and strong policies in place and vision can really help you meet those standards or requirements. Okay. I will share these slides with you. There'll be a recording and we can send the slides out as well. So no need to take notes. Next point here, I really want to get into these 5 foundational processes, right? And I'll reiterate the point that these are for companies at all different stages and of all different sizes. You don't need to be, you know, a massive company to take advantage of these. And a lot of the time, you want to have them in place early. And so these are 5 foundational processes. These are recommended by Salesforce. I'm not making this stuff up. And I think they are super important for putting that kind of groundwork in place. And so the first one here is vision and strategy, right? And this is really just all about, you know, what are you going to do and how are you going to do it? A couple points to note here is that, you know, this isn't about, you know, we're going to manage the best Salesforce platform out there. You know, no. Your vision for the platform should more be, you know, we are going to drive revenue results by enabling our sales team to be more effective in their jobs. And then there should be kind of levels to that about how you're going to go out and execute against it and the steps that you're going to take. It's like Salesforce, for example, uses the V2MOM methodology. V2MOM stands for vision, values, methods, obstacles, and measures, right? And that's how they kind of outline where they're trying to go and the principles that are going to guide them there and the beliefs that are behind it and so on and so forth. It's super important to understand, you know, what you're trying to do on the Salesforce platform. And this absolutely needs to be tied directly to business goals, right? So the next point here is business backlog. And I've already talked about prioritization a little bit. I'm going to continue with it. I think it's fair to say for everybody on the call today that requirements are greater than resources, right? There's more for you to do than can be done with what you've got. And guess what? If you added resources, odds are requirements would increase even more. So you're not going to get away from that. And so you really do need to be able to strategically prioritize what you deliver to the business. And that should be tying back to the vision and the strategy that you have. Emphasis always needs to be on speed and efficiency and fast delivery. And that often gets tied back to doing things declaratively with clicks, not code, wherever possible, right? Code is super important, but if it can be done quickly in a less complex way, then that needs to be the case. And that's really going to drive the business forward for you. So the third point here is software development lifecycle, right? And this is about more than just, oh, well, we've got 3 dev environments, which go to QA, to UAT, to staging, into production. And like, you know, we're all finished. And, you know, it is a lot more than that, right? So this is about leveraging best practices and strategy and alignment across business units and release cadences. And, you know, it should really be driving down risk, driving down instability, and increasing the overall predictability of delivery results. You know, this is what we're going to deliver in our late November release. And that's going to help drive, you know, better communication across teams. And so you do need to have that ironed out. It's super important. You know, really complex stuff, or it can be, but starting to plan early can really take you big steps forward in a pretty short amount of time. And so the same thing goes for, you know, data strategy and architecture and management, right? Broad, multifaceted, and super important. Talking about things like integrations and migrations and data quality and backups and having an overall roadmap for the Salesforce platform, as well as the other assets that you have that are integrating into it or from it. You know, integration across, as I say here, integration across multiple systems leads to tremendous business value and insight. And so you do need to have a plan for this. And I'll talk about a bit some of the downsides if you don't. But really, really important to have a framework and a strategy ironed out up front. And the last one, which probably isn't surprising, is really around communication, right? Everybody needs to be informed. You need to have the right stakeholders involved. You need to be mindful of things like scope creep when you're getting everybody involved, which again is why you need to have a strong vision and strategy and be able to prioritize and justify prioritizations and all those kinds of things. But you have to understand, how do we communicate this out to end users? You know, why are we making these changes, and how are they going to impact your jobs, and how are they delivering to the business goals, right? And if you can't do that, then there's a good chance that you'll kind of start lacking alignment. You might not have buy-in, and then you lose adoption, and you know, you kind of can go down a bit of a black hole there, right? So these are the 5 processes. As I've said a couple times now, it's for people of all stages. And really, it's having all of these things in place that would allow you to go and execute. And maybe that's when you kind of need to layer a center of excellence on top of it, so that you've got people who are responsible for executing and delivering against these points, right? It's really going to drive a lot of value for your business and your Salesforce environment. So what I'm going to do now is talk a little bit about some areas for improvement or challenges, some gaps within these points that we see a lot of our customers challenged with, and a lot of the people in the community challenged with, right? And so the first one, and if you have been paying attention, you may guess that it could be something to do with that business backlog, right? Prioritization is super important because there are so many requests. There's so many projects. There's such a big backlog. How do I know what to do? Well, I do what's most important for the business, okay? But what about the amount of work required to achieve those goals or to meet those requests, right? And do I do the one really big project that's going to deliver a lot of value and it's going to take a lot of work? Or do I do the 7 things that are all going to be done quickly and easily and effectively in a fraction of the time, and maybe incrementally they deliver just as much value, right? So how do you prioritize that? It's super hard. And how do you determine the work required, right? Manual impact analysis is a really challenging thing that can absolutely kill speed and efficiency. Where we want to make a change. It's a simple change. It's just a pick list. Okay, great. It's going to take us 3 weeks to decide if we can do it or not. And then it's going to take 3 more weeks to get out the other side of our release strategy. Okay, month and a half to change a pick list. Right? So what resources need to be involved? Well, that's a really tricky question too, right? Well, we don't want to send somebody too senior at it because they've got more important work to be doing. So we're going to send somebody more junior. Well, does that more junior resource have a full understanding of the technical risk? The dependencies that are involved in these customizations and the impacts on critical objects and data points and business processes, right? Do they understand how this is going to impact the CRO's work? What about regulatory risk, right? Again, coming back to SOX compliance or like data privacy, how are these changes going to impact those? And can that junior resource answer all of those questions? And so what we often see is multiple people being thrown at the initial discovery, planning, and impact analysis phases. They all do things differently. There's not great tools out there for you, and there's often kind of room for human error, right? So I'll show you a little bit about how StrongPoint approaches that challenge. But this is, I think, a really important one to be addressed if you're really going to drive efficiency within your org. So the next piece is really around software development lifecycle and some of the challenges within it. Right? I joked around earlier about how it's not just 3 dev environments to QA to UAT to staging and into production, right? You can't just have that, because if you do, that means that all changes are being created equally and they're all going through the same resources at the same pace. But is that necessarily the best bet? If you've got simple changes that can be made quickly and effectively, should they follow a different quick deploy path versus going through like a full software development lifecycle and CI/CD and dev teams and so on and so forth, right? There's no question that methodologies need to be aligned, right? And best practices and principles, and make sure people aren't stepping on each other's toes. But there's absolutely room here to be more flexible and responsive to the business. And this is also a really great way to maximize the use of your technical resources, right? Knowing at the drop of a hat, this needs to be done by dev, or no, this can go to the admin team, right? That's a really, really powerful place to be. Next one is really around kind of data and strategy and architecture, right? And StrongPoint doesn't necessarily play in the architecture space per se, but the challenge that we see, and it's really common and increasingly common, I think, as time goes on, is that when presented with a request for a change, somebody really has 3 options. You can delete something, you can modify something, or you can create something new. And people don't delete things because it's dangerous. And impact analysis is manual and time consuming, and it's far from perfect. So, maybe they modify it, but modifying it is dangerous too, right? I don't understand the dependencies, and all of those same problems apply. So a lot of the time people are creating new things. And what this leads to is technical debt. And especially for orgs that have been around for ages, we are seeing this increasingly being a challenge. running out of fields on an object, right? I'm starting to hear it more and more, and in environments where you wouldn't expect to hear it. You've got issues with fields and reports and naming conventions and help text and descriptions, and there's all kinds of problems, right? And what this does is it has a negative impact on all of those other things that I've mentioned, right? I can't do impact analysis because we've got so much junk. It's a big problem. And I think what's important, we're here talking about governance, and I've mentioned centers of excellence and things like that, right? Most organizations don't implement those things as soon as they go live, right? Maybe you've had a bunch of production orgs, you've been running Salesforce for a decade, you've consolidated, you've merged, you've done all this stuff, and then now you're going to try to layer governance on top of it, right? But how can you have strong governance practices when you're sitting on top of a shaky foundation, right? So it's super important, and we have a variety of ways to help that. You know, cleanup is one of them, but and I made this joke this morning already to somebody else. If you're thinking about vision and mission and goals, is cleanup one of those, right? No, it shouldn't be, because your goals are about, you know, reducing costs and increasing revenue and delivering value to the business. And running a pristine org is not that. So how can you automate it? How can you make it less of a project? How can you make it less of a problem? That's really how we approach this. And so those are kind of the three areas. I'll just show you in a quick 5-minute demo of kind of some of the gaps that I think exist within those 5 you know, key principles. And there's just one other thing. And I would say, what about reporting? So this is kind of my own opinion, or you know, definitely in line with how StrongPoint feels. But you know, a strong governance strategy also needs to be closed loop, in my opinion, right? You need to be monitoring for exceptions. You've got release management figured out, ironed out, you've got processes in place and all these great tools, but like, what about the things that don't follow those processes? What about mistakes? What about human error? How are you tracking those things? For companies that are struggling with IT audits of any kind, right? How do you prove that you've got all of those things in place? What we often see is a couple people being dedicated to manual review of audit logs and manual reconciliation back to originating change requests, right? They use Jira, they use ServiceNow, they use IBM Sightline, and they're spending their time trying to figure out, okay, well, this is connected to that ticket, and this is connected to that ticket. And then they get a bunch of things at the end that are just left over, and they're like, I have no idea what these things are connected to, right? It's a real problem. And so for me, this is something that organizations need to figure out. And again, this is not in line with goals or vision. So it needs to be automated, and it needs to be something that does not take you away from any of those other objectives. But I think it's absolutely critical. Okay, so that's the end of the slides. I'll jump into a quick demo to just kind of show you a couple of those points quickly. And this will give those that are kind of new to StrongPoint a general sense of kind of what we do. So first of all, StrongPoint's a managed package, for those that don't know. You install us, we'll crawl through the environment over a couple days and put together a full index of all of your customizations and all of their dependencies. I'm just going to give you a quick snapshot of some of the output that would come, kind of giving you visibility to total customizations, dependencies, and all the different types of things that have been built on the platform. Okay. And then from there, the first kind of thing I want to talk about is this idea of impact analysis and how that can help streamline the way that you prioritize work. So let's say, for example, you needed to make changes on the account object. With StrongPoint, you can pull up our DRD, go to the account object, see all standard or custom fields that show up on the account object, and you'd be able to quickly click through and understand complexity and dependencies. So let's say we wanted to make a change to this company's social media field. I'd be able to open it up. I can quickly see the API name, the owner of it. It's a multi-pick list, a date last used of September 21st, 2018. And downstream, I can see what it's connected to. And this is a really simple picture: a list view, a report, and a couple layouts. I would need to dig in here to understand, you know, are these things being used? Am I going to impact anybody's work? But generally speaking, if somebody has made a request for an enhancement or a change to this field, I can do it quickly. Different example. Somebody wants to change this maintenance type field. On the surface, it's identical to what I just showed you. Multi-pick list owned by the same person, API name, similar date last used. but downstream dependencies are dramatically more complex, right? I've connected to an Apex class, a couple list views and a number of reports, a bunch of layouts, a couple workflow rules and an approval process. I'm also seeing reports that have names like high value customers, maintenance packages sold, California customers, right? So maybe there's some organizational risk in here and people are using these at a high level. You know, maybe it's in scope for SOX because we're talking about people doing things like revenue recognition, right? Booking orders. So this is not a simple change, right? And StrongPoint gives you visibility to that really quickly. We've got other ways to do this kind of research. We're on the platform. You're able to build and customize reports. This is one that comes out of the box. Basically gives you visibility to what I was just showing you, but at a greater kind of level. So instead of going one by one on the account object through the DRD, I've pulled a report that shows all of the account object and everything that sits on it. And then the columns that we have here are things like date last used, the person who last modified it, and then we've bucketed out all of the dependencies for you here. Right, so really good ways to see things all at once in one place and perform that impact analysis to understand very, very quickly how long is this going to take, and you know, should we be prioritizing this? Next example I want to quickly talk about is this concept of cleanup. Right, how can you automate cleanup? And it's, you know, one of the great ways that we do it is that we do automate a lot of it. So you can fill this out. This is an automated report cleanup tool, specify some rules and then kick it off. And what's going to happen is that we will automatically identify all of the reports that fall within your filters. So you can say something like, show me every report that has an inactive owner, and then we can automatically archive it for you. Or show me every report that hasn't been run in more than 13 months and doesn't belong to these groups of people. And we'll show that to you, and we will automatically notify the owners and let them know that we're going to archive, and so on and so forth. So really great way for you to prioritize cleanup without dedicating time to it. And then these reports will just run on an ongoing basis. We've got a variety of other tools to help you identify low-hanging fruit around cleanup so that you can effectively and quickly move through a cleanup project. You know, another one that we have here is the unused custom fields report. And so here we're seeing date last used and total numbers of records that are available and where those are populated and where they're not. And it would allow you to, again, to kind of prioritize cleanup. And a really common question, and one that just came up, so I'll answer it on the fly here, is how do you capture date last used, and how do you know date last run, and all those kinds of things, right? And so we have a guide available to show customers of what those fields mean, because they do vary across types. But we give you really good insight into a lot of different factors that would allow you to prioritize cleanup in a quick and efficient way. Even if you're running a really old org, in a lot of cases, we can show you when something was last populated or when something was last run. A lot of that information does exist inside Salesforce. Okay. So moving on, I want to kind of circle back to this concept of impact analysis again, as well as getting into this idea of technical change control and how can you prioritize quick releases. And so I showed you a little bit about how you can use our tools to perform impact analysis. This is a change request. We have our own inside Salesforce, but we do integrate with other tools like Jira, ServiceNow, and even IBM Sightline. And what you're doing here is specifying the customizations that are in scope for change. And this is kind of where we're a little bit different than like Jira and ServiceNow as an example. And then what we'll automatically do based on custom policies that you have in the system is run these things through documentation, and we're going to let you know the level of change control required. We're going to let you know the approvers, and we're going to automatically show you an impact analysis. So we'll say, if you want to change these two things, you need to get approvals. It needs to go through your full software development lifecycle in this case. And here are the things that you need to be aware of. These are some warnings, dependent scripts and workflows and list views and reports. And here's a list of customizations for you that could be impacted by a change to this. So in a very short period of time, you've now gone through and identified kind of what you can and can't change. Okay. Now, once this is all approved, you would be able to deploy directly from here within StrongPoint. And that's kind of one of the ways that a lot of our customers are leveraging this kind of quick deploy path versus, a full-scale software development lifecycle. From within the change request, if we give you the green light with the change control level required, it means that based on the policies that you have, this thing can move quickly. Last point that I'll cover, and then we'll save maybe a minute for questions, is that along the way, StrongPoint is always creating change logs. So every time a change happens within your org, we are going to capture a diff of that change. And we will be comparing it to the policies to notify you if they were compliant or non-compliant. And we will be automatically linking them back to a originating change request, showing you why it was done and where it was done, and giving you a full diff summary of what happened. So if you're an organization that feels that same gap around reporting as I do, or as we do, or as a lot of our customers do, then this is a great tool for you. And I will just kind of quickly pause now and kind of let anybody submit some questions, and I'll come back over to the slide deck for a second. So we're coming up against kind of the edge of time, but what I wanted to wrap up with is just a quick summary. So these are 5 foundational processes as outlined by Salesforce that can help implement a lean governance framework. It can help you move faster. It can help you be safer. And they're broken out into vision and strategy, knowing what you're doing and how you're doing it, how you're managing your business backlog. So make sure that you're doing it intelligently to prioritize the right things for your business, that your release processes are all sound, that you've got an overarching strategy in place for how you're managing all of this data, and that you're communicating out to users. What we've really seen is that there's areas for improvement, specifically around business backlog, prioritization, impact analysis. There's significant enhancements that you can make around the challenge of technical debt, and technical debt and business backlog are very closely related. And finally, like I said, I think around reporting, there's a lot of room for improvement. And if you've got a really tight framework in place and an excellent COE, and you aren't working through a streamlined and automated reporting process to monitor for what's going on, then I think that you're missing something. And so that's the end of the webinar. I hope that was useful for everybody. I'm checking questions here, and I did answer a few of them along the way. I'm not sure if we'll have any others, but we can follow up more specifically to get you answers for those questions. I did also say that we will share the slides or the recording of this. There'll likely be an email that goes out tomorrow. And then last point, I guess, I'll just go back up here. If you're going to Dreamforce, it would be great to see you. So booth in the Trailhead area, we'll always have somebody there. Joint session with one of our customers on managing a complex org. And then if you want to reach out, you want to grab a drink, you want to sit down for a one-on-one meeting with us, let us know. We've got ways to do that. So appreciate your time, everybody. I'm going to wrap up on time here today. There's no additional questions by the looks of things. I hope that was useful, and we will be back in touch. Thank you. Hope everybody has a good day.